Hi, I'm Oliver Mazza. This is the Fifth Period podcast, and we're going to be discussing my favorite movie of all time, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Hello and welcome back to Fifth Period, the podcast hosted by two media teachers, where each week we take a student-selected film and break down all our favorite details. I'm Mr. Brown, and with me as always is...
Mr. Whittle. Hello everyone. I'm happy to be back in the room talking film with Mr. Brown. We are coming to the tail end of our term, and what a term it has been.
Yeah, you might already have noticed our sunny dispositions for the day, and that's because we are but 2 days away from the end of term. So it's not to say that we haven't had an absolutely cracking start to the year, but who doesn't love a decent sleep in?
What I've loved about this term is what this podcast and what Film Club in general has brought to our teaching world. So the amount of conversations we now have on a regular basis with students about film, about the podcast, what they're watching, what we're watching. We've had these before for many years now, but this year has been a bumper year in terms of student participation in film appreciation.
Yeah, it really has been great, and it's my favorite part of the job. Just because this is our final episode of Term 1, we will be doing an extra segment today where we will talk through both ours and the Student Film Club's rankings of all 8 films that we have done for the term. Between this, our Spider-Man breakdown, our weekly watches, we have a lot to cover. So if you would like to skip ahead, I am trying out some time codes in the description.
Very cool.
Yes. Did a little test for that today, and it was all successful.
So you can segment out in the...
Exactly right. You can skip ahead to whatever you want to listen to.
Cool. But we will not be segmenting out the code word.
No. We're not going to tell you when that's coming up. You'll have to just wait and see.
So for those of you playing at home, you will need to listen to the entire podcast for getting that code word.
I also do want to clarify that just because the term is ending, it doesn't mean the podcast is. So for loyal listeners, do not fret, because we will not be leaving you in the lurch over the next few weeks.
We're very excited, in fact, because we have devised an approach to continuing on the podcast over the term break, where we will have the Fifth Period term break edition of the podcast, where the restrictions that we have imposed on how Film Club works, where we watch a G or PG rated film at school, just so that everyone at every age level can participate, will be lifted over the term, because as you would all know, that Mr. Brown and I are both over the age of 18, so we are allowed to watch M&M rated films. So we will be choosing a couple of films that we wouldn't normally watch at school to discuss over the holidays.
Very, very excited for that. We've got 3 that we're actually going to be discussing over the 2 weeks. Because we're going to be missing our final film club of the term this Friday for Good Friday, it does mean that we get to squeeze in an extra film over that break. One of them is going to be a film that I have selected for Mr. Whittle to watch. One is going to be a film that he has selected for me to watch. And one is going to be a student-selected film.
We have put the request out to the students to nominate a list of films for us to choose from. We are ideally after a film that neither of us have seen before from the students. So if you want to dig a bit deeper, that'd be great in terms of your suggestions. But Mr. Brown and I have chosen which films we are going to be selecting for each other. We will reveal now the first film is my selection, which is the film that came out last year in 2022 called RRR. It is on Netflix. It is a Tengali film, in fact. So this is not a film that I would normally interact with, but it's one that when it came up on the list of recommended films in my Netflix algorithm, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. And sure enough, it delivered the goods. So we won't go into it too much now because Mr. Brown has not seen it. No. And I assume a bunch of you guys haven't either. So we are announcing it early so that you can pre-watch it. It is a long film, so do make sure you're committing to sitting down and experiencing it in all its glory. It is also available in multiple languages, so I do recommend watching it with the English overdub. Normally I wouldn't recommend that for a foreign film, but this one they did a really good job on, and it just makes the experience a bit easier for English speakers to experience.
Yeah, and I mean, when you first saw it, you told me a little bit about it. Fortunately, I've forgotten everything you've told me. Good. So I'm very excited to be going in with a very fresh mindset.
Yep. So RRR, if anyone wants to check that out in advance, and that'll be our first term break edition podcast.
Very, very exciting. Before we get stuck into talking about our main feature for the day, quick shout out to our special guest intro, Ollie. Very pleased to have Ollie wrap up the term for Film Appreciation Club. He never misses a week, and both Mr. Whittle and I love talking films with him. As you mentioned earlier, our conversations have increased this year, and Ollie has been a big part of those conversations.
Ollie is okay with the idea of talking during a movie, and he does so at Film Club every week. And if it was anyone else, I'd be, maybe taking away from my Mary Poppins experience. But when Ollie leans over with a half-eaten sandwich and whispers in my ear, "So did you know?" I'm all ears for Ollie. So I'm all about it. So thank you, Ollie, for your intro.
I did find it really, really interesting. Yesterday, he was talking about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and he mentioned how even though it's either his favorite film or one of his favorite films, he wouldn't call it a flawless film. And I responded, well, of course, there's no such thing as a flawless film. But it's interesting how when a film is so appealing to you, you can almost overlook anything that's wrong with it. It almost seems like a flawless film because you're engaging with it, and anything that's not 100% accurate, you just dismiss it immediately.
Yeah, which speaks to the idea of subjectivity in our experiences with art and how we are willing to put aside any kind of flaws within an object that we, as an overall experience of any kind, we seem to have in high regard. So there's a few films where I would say I would struggle to see the flaws in it, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. But those flaws may be pointed out by someone else because they don't see it in the same light that I do. And that's what the beauty of film is, or any piece of art, that it's the eye of the beholder and different opinions. And that's why, I love the conversations we have around film with each other and with the students.
Yeah, often we're pointing that stuff out to each other. Before we get stuck into our film for today, we do need to put out the obligatory spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I heavily encourage you to go see it before you continue listening. I watched it on Disney Plus.
Yeah, I think it's Marvel, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
But
because it was Sony there, I wasn't 100% sure if it had moved across. It's on some form of streaming. I'm just not sure which one.
It is on one of the things. So I'm going to put it out there that I have not seen a single live-action Spider-Man film. So any of these, how many did they release? 6? 2 of each character?
3 for Tobey Maguire, 2 for Andrew Garfield, 3 for Tom Holland.
7.
Plus all the ones that Tom Holland appeared in as an extension of the Avengers.
So I haven't seen any of those. All right?
Oh, so when they were like, okay, let's do this one more time, you were like, this is the first time we've ever done this.
So the point I want to make is that in terms of initial exposition of the story, I love that they made it that even someone like me, who is just ignorant to the Spider-Man backstory, they set it up a little bit, but not to the point where it's tedious. I was very appreciative of that.
I had the same note, mass appeal.
Yeah.
The narration provides enough information for it to be a self-contained film, that you don't need to have seen anything else, but also for hardcore Spider-Man fans, there's loads and loads of references just jam-packed throughout the film.
I was aware that they're there, but they weren't distracting to me as a novice viewer of Spider-Man content. You do run the risk of the balance that's required when you're going to cater to multiple audience types, and I think they did really well on that.
Yeah, even just like small things like, and again, this is going to be lost on you, but in the opening, he's walking down the street dancing with his finger guns. That's very much reminiscent of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 3. The jokes that they made out of it, so the very famous Uncle Ben line is, with great power comes great responsibility. And they change it in this one with great ability comes great accountability.
Right.
Like they poke fun at what has come before because we have heard it so many times. I mean, the reboots have occurred in such a small space of time. Tobey Maguire's in 2002. He did 3 films before Andrew Garfield rebooted in 2012. He did 2 films before Tom Holland rebooted again in 2017.
And none of those 3 actors are in this, are they?
No, there was talks, a lot of rumors early on that they might make guest voice appearances, but to the best of my knowledge, none of that went through.
I might bring up this point now. So just to clarify, is there anyone from preceding Spider-Man films in this one, like anyone came over for voice acting?
Look, not to my knowledge,
but I'd like even though I haven't seen the films, I do kind of have a general idea of who's appeared in a bunch of them. And when I looked through the cast list for this film, no one stood out to me as, they also were in. So I know Mickey Rourke's in one of them. Oh, no, he's in an Iron Man, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Because I got him confused and his character in Iron Man with Doc Ock because of the arms and stuff that. Who is played by Catherine Hahn in this one.
So good.
So I want to generally call out how amazing the cast is in this film. This is a stacked cast. Catherine Hahn being my favourite of the lot, but she's one of the many in this film.
Yeah, they're all so good. Some of them only briefly appear, but in the time that they're on screen, they all just completely own those characters.
Yeah, so we'll probably give nods along the way as we talk through the film, but yeah, calling it out right now, loved the casting.
Yeah, really, really well done.
Yeah.
And on the note of having previous Spider-Man cast appear, obviously this is getting a sequel film, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which will be coming out.
Middle of this? Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I think it's middle of the year,
Yeah,
and another trailer
American
was released
release.
today, I think. So
cool.
it must be coming out soon. And very topical again. Look at us, keeping with the times.
With the Mary Poppins podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
I feel we need to call it out early on. You're not a huge fan of animation.
Not a huge fan of animation. Not a huge fan of superhero films either. Like there are some that I do like, but out of them, what have they done? Like 30 different Marvel films now. I would say
more.
I've watched maybe 5 of them.
Right.
And then there's another universe. Is it DC? Yeah.
It's so silly because it's certainly not anything that's a point of pride for me to be like, I know about superheroes. Because of how big they have become in pop culture, it does sometimes catch me off guard when people don't know anything about them.
Yeah, but that's just, I understand what you're saying. And I know I'm probably in the minority of, even though I'm an older person than maybe the listeners to this podcast and our students and yourself. But yeah, most people would know more than what I know about them. I have little interest. It's not a higher priority for me in terms of what is out there to watch. So,
right.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, what did you think of the animation in the film?
So the animation in this film is very eclectic, and that's something that I liked about it, where it is a mix of what you expect from animation, but remembering that there are different styles of animation. So there's variations of animation, the more traditional animation, but this meshed existing styles to make their own, and then brought in other things as well that really made it unique, and that is a massive win for me. The main part that I think they excelled in is the use of colour.
Agreed. And I have a very novice understanding of animation, but the things for me that really stood out were all of the ways that they included elements that you would see in a comic book within the film. So they give it that kind of comic grain to a lot of the characters. Whenever they're doing focus, they use the red, green, blue radial blur.
I've got it called, I've written it down. What's it called? Stereoscopic. It was because it's also the way that you could look at traditional 3D photos. Where
so it's the separation of the three colours.
So that was very cool as well. Agreed.
Some other very obvious examples, they use split screens to be reminiscent of comic panels, but also onomatopoeia text. So when characters do things like a punch, it'll be like pow, zap, bang. My favourites, there's one where he's typing on a computer and it just goes clackety, 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 clack. And then another one where he throws a bagel at someone and as it hits them in the head in really tiny writing in the background, you just see it says bagel.
Really? I did not notice that. That's great. Another thing about the animation that I made a note on is that it's quite cinematic in the way it's presented as well. And this note came to me in the scene where Miles is driving with his dad in the car, in the back of the police car. So the way shots were framed and what the background was doing and the use of focus within the animation, it still had a very cinematic feel to it, which I don't feel I've ever said that before about any previous animation, not that I've seen much.
Well, you try to avoid it at all costs.
That's right, but yes.
All right, so early on immediately we're introduced to Miles, and I love how likable Miles is.
Yes.
From the get-go, and again, a testament to the voice acting. He's really charming, but he's got this innocence about him. It's so well played that you're immediately like, yep, I'll back this character, which is great because obviously it's not Peter Parker. We're being introduced to a new Spider-Man. So to be able to draw people in immediately and have them behind him is a really, really great achievement.
And I think it's a big success for a film like this to have the hero that's being set up to be someone younger. So the appeal is wider there because teenagers can see themselves, or any kind of younger person can see themselves in the protagonist. But he's not so young that he's immature to a point where we as adults can't also connect and find him admirable.
Yeah, and I also like that when we're introduced to him, we're introduced in a world that already has a Spider-Man.
Yes.
Spider-Man already exists in the world. We don't need to see his origin story. We see Miles' kind of origin throughout the film, but they've already established Spider-Man's been in this world for a while. People just accept that he's part of the world. And I like that they do that with that narration. It's funny because you and I have said this a lot in the podcast. It's not often that you will have characters that are breaking the fourth wall. But even in the films that we've looked at, it's happened in Ferris Bueller, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Mary Poppins, and even to some extent kind of The Truman Show as well because of all of the meta references.
Yes. Yep.
So we say it's rare, but it keeps popping up.
Yes.
I think Chris Pine, with that sort of charming version of Spider-Man, was such a solid choice for the voice. He only features in the very beginning of the film as Spider-Man.
Right. Okay.
But he pairs so well with the Jake Johnson character.
So I did not distinguish a difference between the initial Spider-Man and the Jake Johnson one.
Is that right?
I know Jake Johnson from other shows and stuff.
New Girl.
New Girl. That's right. And I know his vibe and delivery. And I had not distinguished that the earlier one wasn't him. Is it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, their voices are similar enough, but there's a distinction between them where Jake Johnson just fits that kind of beaten down vibe.
Yes. Yeah.
So much more.
That's a great casting choice in terms of what the character wanted to be as well. Yeah.
And so he heads off to school. We're a couple of product placements. We get the Nikes and the Sony headphones.
Yes, even in animation, you still need some product placement.
He's got to be wearing shoes of some kind. Why not Nikes?
Yeah, I'm sure they're still getting a pretty penny for.
I bet they are.
Yeah.
We see like the monotony of his day and how stressed he is as a teenager through that montage of him at school going back and forth between the corridors and all the questions that are coming up and the books are piling up. Like, we're instantly feeling quite sympathetic towards Miles' character.
So can I just clarify? He's at a new school, so he's out of a comfort zone there. But then the montage because he's at a point where he's already got well-established relationships with his teachers. So does that montage? Because is it his first day at school that we're experiencing, or has he already been going to the school?
My understanding was that it was his first day at school.
Yeah, then I agree. That's what it was as well. And then he gets to a point where the teacher sees him as always being late when he walks in. So the montage speeds through his time at the school.
Perhaps it's across multiple days. I thought it was just supposed to be showing his first day.
That's what I thought as well. But then when she said, Miles, you're always late.
I hadn't thought about that.
And then he has a great little quip about time being relative. And,
how good is that?
Yeah, I love it. He's very personable. I really like Miles a lot. But in that montage as well, there's a nod to the text Great Expectations.
Yep.
Not too much in terms of intertextuality. I'm actually reading that book at the moment. It's a book that I haven't read before, and I'm about halfway through.
It's about someone who gets bitten by a radioactive spider, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Charles Dickens in the 1850s was writing about a radioactive spider. Yes, spoiler alert. There's not too much. I was trying to think there's a lot of any connection between the narrative, but it's more about what the title is inferring.
Yeah, right.
Which we see when he goes down and does the wall art, where he makes it no expectations.
Yeah. They bring you in with a bit of heart, the relationships between the characters, the struggles that Miles is going through to live up to some sort of expectation, but also that everything is always layered with a good balance of comedy.
Yes.
And they go down in the subway and they show him trying to climb the gate.
Yes.
And just like the comedic timing is brilliant. Like, it's so good, but it also works towards showing his lack of coordination and the fact that he's as far removed from a superhero as you can get.
Yeah, and it also shows, like, it's contrasting his inability with his uncle's... What's his uncle's name? Aaron. Yeah. Who he admires his uncle a lot, and his uncle flawlessly jumps over the gate, whereas Miles is struggling, and so he's in his uncle's footsteps in that regard. Yeah.
Mahershala Ali, by the way.
Yes.
So good.
Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, they go down there, they do the graffiti, then he gets bitten by the radioactive spider. No messing around.
It took me a while, like, am I meant to know that the spider's radioactive straight away?
You know something's wrong with it, right?
Well, it is flickering, so, like, spiders don't normally flicker.
Well, and to be honest, we don't know. I mean, only by contextually knowing that Spider-Man gets bitten by a radioactive spider.
But if an audience member who didn't know that, it's not shown immediately that's...
No, but we know something's wrong with the spider.
Agreed, yes.
Yeah,
and then...
in different versions of the films, I'm not sure that they claim radioactive spider. There's like enhanced science spiders in the Tobey Maguire one and pretty similar for the Andrew Garfield. So there's adapted versions, but usually it's spider plus science equals something.
Well, 5 or 10 minutes later in this film, when Miles is trying to work out what's gone wrong with him when he goes back to that location, there does come up with the spider and the radioactive symbol. So it does clearly tell you a bit later. I was just curious whether at that point in the film when he's first bitten, we are meant to have known that the spider is radioactive. Certainly there's something's wrong with it, yes, but in what way? The mystery was there for me.
Yeah, and I mean, that's fine too, right? We don't need to have it all.
Yeah.
That goes back to the whole not spoon-feeding your audience. They'll pick it up.
Yeah, but then 10 minutes later they spoon-feed.
They spoon-feed it,
Just in case you weren't.
Just in case. And then I do like that sequence at school. We meet Gwen. He rips out half her hair.
Great fun.
I like that they show the awkwardness of like teenagers getting along.
The puberty references.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
And then he gets chased by the security guard.
Yep.
The like visual storytelling. They don't tell you things that they can show you. He goes into the security guard's office. We know it's the security guard's office because there's a photo of him with like, I don't know, his bowling team or something.
Yep.
I really like the slapstick elements in the film.
Yeah, they're not overdone. So like you've been saying, the comedic elements are well done. So that's that same sequence is when he then ends up out on the side of the building with the birds. Yes, very very slapstick.
And that's the thing though, like it's a very different form of comedy, but I feel it works for multiple reasons in this. It's a comic book adaptation, so we can suspend disbelief a little bit more. The goofiness kind of fits into it.
Yep.
But also, in a film that we're going to be seeing like action sequences from, it's a really smooth transition to go from slapstick comedy sequences into action sequences. Kind of like an evolution of the different ways that action can be shown.
Yep.
So then we end up back in the railway and he finds the collider.
Yes.
I specifically love how they show spider sense.
Yeah, that was fun. And what I liked when the new Peter Parker that comes in meets Miles and they show the spider senses through the, what would you call them, like the bolts coming off their heads.
Yeah.
The colouring of the second Peter Parker's was red and blue to say he is the official, in this scene at least, Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And so the symbolism in the colouring as well is really strong. But absolutely, they've set it up very early on that they're going to be able to communicate with each other, that the spider senses are tingling.
Yeah, and it's in this sequence too that we are introduced to some villains, and they are familiar villains for people who know the Spider-Man franchise, but they also give them a bit of a twist. So as someone who is not a big comic book reader, I'm enthused about comic book films. I've seen a lot. I know a lot about comics, but there's a lot that I'm missing from my understanding. So perhaps this version of Green Goblin does exist in some form throughout the comics, but it's certainly not a mainstream version of that character. And so it's a way to introduce familiar characters to the audience, but give them a different take because we've seen them time and time again in the live action versions.
So I did write down that, like, because Spider-Man, Peter Parker refers to Green Goblin as Norman. So
Yep.
so I'm oblivious.
That's
to,
Norman Osborn.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Played by Willem Dafoe in the Tobey Maguire version.
Okay.
Is that enough to entice you? You love Willem Dafoe.
I do like Willem Dafoe, but more into Wild at Heart than Spider-Man. Anyway.
So yes, we have Green Goblin. We're introduced to Fisk, who you do know a lot about because you watched Daredevil.
Yes, absolutely. But it took me a little while, until the name is dropped, really, to know that it's the same character.
Yeah, right.
Like the depiction of Fisk or Kingpin, is it?
Yep. Kingpin is the alter ego.
In this is not totally dissimilar to Daredevil, but it is a little bit different.
Yeah, and then we have, I'm trying to remember the last character. I've got it somewhere.
This Uncle Aaron's...
Uncle Aaron's character.
Yeah.
What's the name?
Nope.
Don't know. It'll come up later and I'll say it.
The guy with the metal claws.
He's scary.
He is. He
very
really is.
scary.
That chase scene down when they're...
Prowler. His name is Prowler.
When he's chasing Miles back out from the collider.
Oh, the sound effects.
Awesome.
So freaky.
Really cool.
I did wonder, though, if Uncle Aaron knew that collider was down there, why had he taken Miles there just the night earlier?
Yeah, that's
Get
a
him to do
valid
some
point.
graffiti somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's putting him in risk. I also like that in this sequence when we're introduced to Kingpin, the first thing we hear is like a hum of him. He's doing the old school 1960s, like do-do-do,
Yes,
do-do-do.
I did notice that.
What did you think of the music in this film?
I have 3 words noted down. Soundtrack is great.
Me too.
I
And
love it. It's quite eclectic.
none of these songs were songs that I've listened to on a regular basis. Some I was familiar with, some I wasn't, but all of them were so great with creating mood.
Yes, absolutely. But also establishing setting. So they are looking for that urban Brooklyn vibe, and they do certainly speak to that. But it is still diverse enough in the song selection. There was one song in there that I think is a Run DMC song that I'm loosely aware of. But outside of that, they were all new to me as well.
Yeah.
It really spoke to...
Great, though.
Yeah, the film's requirements to set up the characters, set up the setting. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, especially, and I mean, the reason I made that note was after Peter Parker A is killed and they're kind of paying respects to him, they show the funeral, he goes to visit Stan Lee at the costume shop and picks up his Spider-Man costume. That soundtrack in particular was great. Really good to create that kind of pathos of the scene.
I do think I need to make a point here just to put it out there that it was about the collider scene, which I still thoroughly enjoyed in terms of the excitement of it and, the use of colour and that just the craziness. Like, there's a lot going on in that. But it was at this point that I started to feel the tedium of a superhero film, and I'm sorry. I've been very positive so far into this film, and I've still got a lot of positive things to say. I do generally think it's a good film, but I did find myself having to go, wait a sec, you just weren't paying attention to the setup of why the collide is occurring. So I found myself. You know, when you find yourself getting distracted and you go, I want to be paying attention to this film. So I had to rewind, which is a point to me that it wasn't engaging me enough.
Yeah, and look, I would say this is probably one of the more mainstream versions of a superhero film. I think they take some of the really familiar tropes of a superhero film and do subvert them in order to get that mass appeal. One example in particular that I can think of is when he's trying to test out his powers and you see him go up the tall building.
Yes.
And then you immediately see him going back down the stairs and then he sees a slightly smaller building and he goes up the stairs again. Like, those elements of comedy really work to kind of save you from seeing the same thing over and over again.
But yes, agreed. But ultimately, this film is still following that generic hero's journey structure, right?
Well, most films follow a hero's journey.
Most do. Most. I don't know about most. I would say a lot do. Absolutely. And I feel that that's something that gets tedious after a while.
Fair enough.
But, you know, I do agree when we look back at, say, Mary Poppins last week, would that be following the hero's journey as clearly as this one.
Oh, certainly not as clearly. I mean, we spent most of the time talking about how there was no clear narrative whatsoever.
There you go. That's right. So maybe that's the appeal for Mr. Whittle, is that I don't like things to be clear. There you go. Yeah. Opaque all the way.
So next we are introduced to Spider B. Parker from the other universe. Spider B. Parker. Peter B. Parker.
Yes.
The Jake Johnson version of Spider-Man.
Spider B. Parker.
Yeah, sorry. I said it without even thinking too. It was only when you were looking at me funny that I realized I'd made a faux pas. But I love how he does the here we go again, and we get a version of the narrative that we've already seen from the first Spider-Man, but everything's just a little bit more pathetic. It starts out equally positive, and then his life goes slightly downhill. Like, what if one or two things didn't go right for Spider-Man and he just spiraled? I really like this kind of pathetic version of the character.
Yes.
I find him far more engaging than a perfect superhero.
Yeah, I think humanizing him a little bit that way makes him more interesting. And you also need to distinguish from the worlds as well. It's part of what the narrative's telling us. So, yeah, it worked.
Yeah, and I like to, in his sort of flashback sequence, or when he talks about when he first arrived in this time zone, and we see Times Square with all the movie posters in the background.
the Seth Rogen one.
Such fun ones. The Seth Rogen one called Hold On To Your Horses.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
But I made a couple of notes because there were some really, really interesting ones. I noticed one that said, Hi, Hello, and it's kind of like a piss take of Oh Hello, which is the Nick Kroll, John Mulaney special, which is great because John Mulaney then features later in the film as Peter Porker. There's a Snapchat app called Peekaboo. Instead of Coca-Cola, it's Coca-Soda. And there's a Jersey Boys poster that just says, The Noise Boys. But my favorite one was it looks like it's a Shaun of the Dead poster, but it says From Dusk Till Dawn, which was actually an idea Edgar Wright had to make a sequel for Shaun of the Dead that was about vampires instead of zombies.
I had never heard of that. That would be amazing.
Wouldn't it?
Oh.
I want to live in the universe where that happens.
Yeah, agreed, yeah.
So he meets the new Peter Parker. Hijinks ensues. The cops are after them, and they're getting stuck to the train and dragging his face along the ground. This was where it felt very comic booky to me. Like, we see him with a black eye and his teeth are missing. Obviously, in the next scene, his face is completely flawless again. Yeah. But they're taking a bit of an opportunity to be like, this isn't a regular live action superhero movie. We can do some Looney Tunes style gags along the way. Yeah. Which I thought really works as a tone for the film.
Then goes to Aunt May's house?
Not quite yet. They go, this is where we meet Doc Ock. So they go to the lab.
Yes.
And this is my favourite scene.
Oh, your favourite scene?
Yeah, I love this sequence.
The Doc Ock reveal is very cool. Like, I knew it was Catherine Hahn. Even when they're in the classroom and there's a video of her
talking,
and then I'm like, I know that voice straight away. I just love everything that she does. And then, sure enough, she pops up in that scene.
Yeah, and you seem surprised that this was my favourite sequence. I just think it's a really fun mix of the characters getting along and getting to know each other a little bit, but also it's the first time they're trying to do something. It's the first time Miles is actually putting his abilities to the test, and it's a complete disaster. Yeah. The Spider-Man wearing tracksuit pants over the top of his suit and sitting on the exercise ball while he's working at the computer. Just the whole idea of him being really pathetic and trying to flirt with Catherine Hahn's character while Miles is trying to get the codes. It's just fun. It's a really fun scene. And it's followed by the swinging in the forest sequence. The whole thing is just cool. A really good intro to his powers. And it's the first time we learn that he can turn invisible too.
Yes, so that's unique to Miles, right?
Yeah.
And that's not anything from a preceding Spider-Man.
Certainly not from a live-action film. Perhaps it exists in animation or in comics somewhere that I've missed. But yeah, it's a fun addition because it provides a point of difference between him and the other characters.
Agreed. Yeah.
Then we end up at Aunt May's.
Okay, and then Aunt May as well is a very grounding character, which. My assumption is that she's a recurring character from preceding Spider-Man stories.
Correct.
But I found her and her criticism of Peter, the Peter that's in that world, really endearing. And yeah, I just liked her as a character for sure.
Yeah, and I like that she calls the USB a goober. It's just like, it's the equivalent to calling it a plot device, right? It's just like in that world, they're just like, oh, you just got to do the thing. You put the thing on the thing and then you do it. That's what superheroes do. Like, I like that it's so procedural. It's just like, all right, we'll go through the routine. You know, we beat the bad guys. We use the goober to save the world. Like, I just really like how they pare all that back. This is when we're introduced to all the others. So we got Gwen, Peter A. Parker, Peter B. Parker, Peter Porker, Nicolas Cage's Noir Spider-Man.
Spider-Noir.
Spider-Noir, there you go.
Yeah.
We've got the anime one, the Penny Parker.
Yes.
Which is your favorite?
I think I've got recency bias because I loved Nicolas Cage's Spider-Noir. Because we have been, as we've mentioned in a previous podcast, been working on noir stuff with our Year 9 media classes. So noir is front of mind for conversations we've had over the last month or two.
You've really come around on your appreciation.
Let's not go that far, but for this, it really stood out how they used the tropes of noir.
So funny.
Once this character's introduced, really well. It was great.
Again, taking the piss. He says the line, "Wherever I go, the wind follows, and the wind smells like rain." It's just so good. Just this nonsense, poetic, depressing statements.
Plus the fact that it's Nicolas Cage delivering it all.
Oh,
yeah, it just
it's so good.
It's fun.
I love John Mulaney as Peter Porker. Can you float around through the air while smelling a delicious pie? It's just so absurd.
Yeah, John Mulaney, if anyone wants to check out a great comedian, his stand-up specials, which I think are on Netflix as well, they're fantastic. John Mulaney is just an all-round, highly intelligent individual. He's written a lot for SNL prior to becoming a frontman comedian, but he's just fantastic. You and I have great admiration for
I
John
adore him.
Mulaney.
He's one of my favorite comedians. Yeah. I really like this sequence too because, again, we're introduced to some fun characters, but also this is where that great expectations things comes back. They have all of these expectations of Miles. They're like, can you do this? Can you do this? And then Peter B. Parker has to kind of step into his defense, like, oh, well, he can do this. And he's like, he can't do it on command. And like, he has to keep saying all the things that he can do and then realizing that he actually doesn't have control over that yet.
Why was Peter fighting for Miles to like come across as competent in that scene? I missed that a little bit.
I think that he feels a little like he's a bit of a letdown in his own world. He can see almost a younger version of himself in Miles, like how difficult it was for him at the very beginning to develop his powers all on his own. And so he just sort of works as like a bigger brother kind of figure.
So there's like a vicarious kind of nature through it. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and you do see that. Like throughout the film, early on he finds it a little bit annoying. And then at one point he says to him, it's a really nice change of pace just to be hanging out with someone that's not trying to kill me.
Yes, yeah, I like that line. Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah.
I like how he has that kind of mentor role for him because in a lot of aspects of his life, he's a disappointment, yet he's still the thing that Miles needs in order to get him where he needs to be. It's at this point that Miles finds out that Uncle Aaron is the Prowler.
Yes.
Which I thought was really, really interesting because he chases him and then it's followed by another scene very quickly where he gets in a fight with him. So this all happens in a very short space of time and his uncle finds out that he is this version of Spider-Man as well. And you see him looking at him with the mask off and then he puts the mask back on his face. And I was like, oh, this is really sinister. Is he trying to like disassociate the fact that he's related to him so that he can actually go through with killing him?
Absolutely, that's what it was. That's my view on it. That it was
so dumb.
Yeah, it really is because he is so committed to the role of the Prowler that he's going to bypass the fact that it's a family member and go, I've still got a job to do. Like, because he says a preceding line where he can always be trusted to get the job done, something to that effect. And that set it up for me is like when he does get confronted to, because he was always going to work out that it's Miles, right?
Yeah.
That he was going to have that conflict. And then so when he put the mask back on, I'm like, oh, he's ruthless.
And that was the thing. Like, I wasn't 100% sure. Maybe it could have been he was trying to conceal his identity. I think we'll get mixed opinions on that when we're discussing with students. But
ultimately, he does the more noble thing and doesn't kill Miles.
Only because he gets shot.
No.
He puts the mask back on, and before he can do anything, he gets shot in the back.
I thought there was something prior to that where he does. Oh, okay. So it's left up in the air. That's cool.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. And now that you pointed out, because his facial expression is from getting shot. Yes. Okay. Yep.
It is really interesting because if he was going to go through with that, we still get this sequence where Miles is feeling really bad after he's been shot, like it's all his fault.
Yes. But like to leave a question unanswered like that around character development, that's a what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Anyway,
I wanted to help you out, but I had no idea.
let's cut this.
I will. It's fine. All right. So,
A risky thing to do.
do you want me to keep it in now?
No.
That clap marks the point where I cut it, right? Cut back in. So obviously they do this sequence because a really big staple of superheroes and Spider-Man, which came up in No Way Home, is loss, is integral to their character. And so this was a moment where they all kind of bond over the fact that they've all lost someone, but ultimately then decide that Miles isn't ready for this final mission. I really felt quite emotional in that sequence. Not about the loss, but about the fact that he hadn't lived up to the expectations and that he was being left behind.
Yeah, but I mean, we had seen some foreshadowing with the leap of faith set up as well. We always knew what was going to happen here, right?
Yeah, but it's a little heartbreaking that the one character that was saying, no, you can do it, is the one that tells him, no, you can't come along.
But then it does leave Miles up to being, no, you solely have to believe in yourself, which really shows integrity and that strength. Yeah.
And so he has his big suit power up. I love his final suit, the black and red.
The black one, yeah, that's cool. Yep.
Very, very cool. And I love that they incorporate his graffiti, like the spray paint, into the suit design.
Yeah, so like there's some kind of nuance and individuality to the suit. Yep.
I didn't understand why the group had to sneak in through the benefit in order to get down to the collider. Couldn't they have just taken the train tunnels that they used the first time to get to the collider?
Were they aware that the train tunnels also led to the collider, or was Miles...
they'd be hanging out with Miles.
Maybe
poor communication skills there. But I do like the little moment where Peter talks to Mary Jane, because he's got a Mary Jane back in his timeline and their relationship has split up.
Oh, they're talking about the bread. Yes.
And you can just see Gwen in the background. Like, this is so awkward. We see lots of little moments throughout this film that lead him to say, I'm going to go back to my timeline and I'm going to fight for my family.
Yes.
So I think they're all like really fun, kind of subtle moments that then ultimately lead to that bigger decision at the end. So they go down, they start working to destroy the collider, and then Miles arrives and Doc Ock says, Spider-Man. It's like he's not a kid anymore. He's the only one that's been addressed as Spider-Man in this sequence.
Oh,
like
so
he's the proper one.
The title, yes, gives him that kind of nobility, yeah.
The other really big takeaway from this sequence is that we learn a little bit more about Fisk, stuff with his family. We see them fearful of what he is. Presumably he kept his shadier business a secret from them.
Isn't this replicating a scene that's shown earlier?
Yeah, so the scene earlier is a flashback of his family finding out, but in this scene, they actually materialize in front of him and then don't want to kind of come into this dimension because they're afraid of him.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's almost like in all versions, he's destroyed his family.
Yeah, and it also points out that even if he had been able to achieve what his intent was with the collider, it was ultimately him that was the problem, and the family was always going to run away from him. Yeah. Dark.
It is dark, but I like quirky, goofy moments paired against such dark moments. Especially too when he delivers like a big blow to Miles and you're like, whoa, that would have killed him.
Yeah, well, it's the same blow that he brings down on a preceding character.
It's the Chris Pine
one
at the start. Yeah.
So, the assumption was that it was a deathly kind of a knock from Kingpin, but Miles has the power to get up.
Yes.
Helped by the fact that his dad.
Yeah. And again, another very familiar element to Spider-Man films, the idea of law enforcement being conflicted with how they feel about Spider-Man. Sometimes they're like, oh, he's getting in the way, he's a menace. Other times they're like, no, he's good, he's helping us. And I like that Miles' dad has that conflict just within himself.
Yeah, yep. great use of color and all the animation elements in these collider scenes in general, but I think they doubled down in this climactic scene.
And then we get the resolution at the end where he calls his dad. It's a really quite nice moment because he hadn't been responding to his dad when he talked through the door earlier. And so it's like he calls him back to kind of talk through some of the stuff that had come up. But then he ditches his dad on the phone so that he can go hug him as Spider-Man.
Yes.
I'm sure his dad would have been very confused as to why Miles had just hung up the phone.
So are we to infer that his dad does work out that Miles is Spider-Man?
I don't think so. I think he just thinks Spider-Man's real clingy.
Yeah. But there was something else as well that after they hugged, there's something that was said. I can't remember what it is, but it's like, the seeds planted there for the dad to maybe work it out. But
I don't know how he'd be able to see through that voice. That's a very convincing Spider-Man voice.
Yeah.
Film ends. We've got the portal, the dimension to another world. Obviously, setting up for the sequel.
Now, I did play through the credits because I know a thing with Marvel films is they love to have post-credits stuff.
I'm shocked that you played through them. Though.
Well, it was while I was putting the dishes away or something like that. I left it running. This one didn't have anything at the end, did it? Outside of a little tribute to Stan Lee?
I didn't sit through the credits.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so, and that for me in itself was admirable that they didn't go in for that because I just think that that's overdone in terms of you have to also sit through the credits to get something else as well. I don't want that. I want the movie to end and the credits to roll and that be that.
I suppose you could argue that it's a way to get you to watch the credits, appreciate all of the people that have put their work into it. But even as a big film fan and someone who does appreciate all the little things that go into film, I don't pay much attention as those names are rolling across the screen.
I recently watched a film where they put all the entire intro credits at the start. Tar, the new Cate Blanchett film.
Cate Blanchett.
Yeah, so they put all of the credits at the start.
There you go.
Yes.
And how were they?
Oh, riveting.
Anything happening at the same time?
Nope. Slides of names to start you off.
You will sit here and you will watch this.
If you want to watch the actual film, you don't know where to skip to, just watch this for 5 minutes first.
That's interesting.
It's risque.
It's risque. It's not risque. It's risky.
It's just risky.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, should we move on to our weekly watches?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you can sum up your overall thoughts on the film if you'd like.
I enjoyed the watch. This is
3.5 on Letterboxd, I think I saw.
Third time I think I've watched it actually. We got halfway through a watch. This is our first rewatch in terms of Film Appreciation Club. So all the films we watched this year weren't ones that we watched last year, except for this one.
Wow, I didn't even remember that. So there you go.
Yep. So we did watch this in 2022 with Film Club, but 3.5 on Letterboxd is. I was actually contemplating. I'd probably have it down to a 3, but 3 still is strong.
You shouldn't have brought it up. Now you're going to change your rating.
No,
it's going to tank.
No, I've actually stopped rating on Letterboxd because I do prefer what we do, where we have an in-depth conversation rather than do the arbitrary a bunch of stars to things. I think I'd much rather not tell people what I thought about a film with the amount of stars and actually have a conversation about it.
100%. And we're going to touch on that later when we get to our ranking of the term films as well.
Uh-huh.
But before that, weekly watches. How many films did you watch this week, Mr. Little?
In this week, I actually only watched 3, I believe.
Okay, a neat 3. I've got a messy 5. I don't know if any of them were amazing. Some were okay. But I got to my 5 and then thought, I better just watch TV for the rest of this week because I'm going to have another 12 or 13 films here. So I had to restrict myself.
Yeah, I don't know. Are we going to have to put a cap on this over the holidays? Because I do tend to watch a bunch over the holidays. So maybe we'll have to do a best of our week because I will not be surprised if I come to a podcast middle of the term break and I have watched 15, 20 films.
Maybe we should do like a 3 films or 5 films or something like that.
I like that idea.
Yeah, because I've actually had another student-suggested segment, which I'll bring up later. So if we're putting that in the mix, we might need to trim the fat a little bit.
Sure.
All right, so first up for me, The Lost City.
Oh, yes.
So this is a Sandra Bullock, Channing Tatum film. Nobody was taking it seriously. The writers, the cast, they were all just having fun with it, and so I had fun with it too. I certainly wouldn't put it up amongst my favourite comedies of all time, but it's a bit of fun. I must say the star players for me, though, were Daniel Radcliffe and Brad Pitt, who appear throughout the film. You can just see that they are having an absolute blast. And that, for me, as a viewer, is something that always really draws me in. When I can see that they're enjoying whatever they're performing, I really respond to that. It's a ridiculous action adventure comedy film where characters that shouldn't be in these ridiculous scenarios end up in the scenarios, and we see how they deal with that. Essentially, a adventure romance novelist and her cover model for the novels end up in one of their adventures for real.
Right. For me, it's very much the other end of the spectrum from your simple comedy, action, adventure fun. It was a deeply art house film that even I found, and I'm someone who's very lenient on these kinds of films, so I found this film tedious to the point where I will admit I didn't even get through the whole film. So does that count as a watch if I don't watch the whole film?
Well, you've already brought it up, so you might as well. Clearly, it wasn't very good.
No, it's called The Mountain. Mm-hmm. It's a film from a few years ago. It's got Ty Sheridan. Is that the guy?
Is
from
that a name?
It's a name because
sure.
I said it. But the guy from Ready Player One.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
I believe it's Ty Sheridan, and it's also got Jeff Goldblum in it. The reason I went to this film is because it's directed by a guy called Rick Alverson, who previously directed a film called The Comedy, which had Tim Heidecker as a protagonist in it, and I loved that film. I knew from that film, though, that everything else that he does would be challenging to watch, and he may have some misses as well as some hits, and this one was a miss for me to the point where, I got 2/3 through and I flicked it off. Really just nothing going.
You went up the mountain, but you didn't come back down again.
Correct, absolutely. So, yes.
I had a Jeff Goldblum film in my mix. He wasn't the star player. It was a Jason Bateman, Jennifer Aniston film called The Switch, which I put it on thinking it was going to be just a straight comedy, but it ended up being like a family film with a bit of heart to it as well. So the plot is that Jennifer Aniston and Jason Bateman are close friends. She wants to have a baby through artificial insemination, and through some sort of misunderstanding, Jason Bateman ends up switching places with the person that was going to artificially inseminate her. So, unbeknownst to her, she ends up having Jason Bateman's child. Ridiculous plot. So stupid. You would think it was supposed to be just a dumb comedy, but then there's all this heart that comes in about halfway through the film with Jason Bateman actually really connecting with the kid and the family dynamic between them. I was surprised with how ridiculous the concept is. I was surprised at how much I really enjoyed it. Like, I really like Jason Bateman. I'm a bit of a sucker.
I was going to say, I'm surprised you hadn't seen this film before, because my understanding is, you love Jason Bateman to the point where he would have been someone who you've just worked through the entire catalogue.
It's funny you say that. After I finished it, I was like, I'm going to watch another Jason Bateman film I haven't seen. Couldn't find one.
Oh, there you go.
Because I have done most of his catalogue.
Yeah. And rightly so. He is a great actor. And we've talked about this before, where he signs up for just great comedies as well. Like he seems to just be really good at selecting good scripts.
I'm
more
torn
often
on
than
that.
not.
Yeah, look, his catalogue is hit and miss, but I always think he's really good in it.
Yeah, okay. For me, the next one was John Wick 2. So I spoke on the previous podcast that I was working through the John Wicks.
Stay tuned for John Wick 3 next week.
Yes, for sure. But this one was a little lesser than the original for me in terms of entertainment. Not to say that I wasn't entertained, but for me it was a bit schlocky in terms of the narrative. They brought in a lot of elements, and we had a really good conversation about it. The struggle that a writing group will have where they want to make a sequel for anything, and keeping a balance there of making it something newer and fresh, but also still kind of keeping the core essence of what made the first film great. And just reiterate that the first John Wick, I love. So that second one, they did a good job, but I just found some of the things they brought into the storyline, like the high table and the markers and all this like mythology around how the hitmen of the world work. I just thought it was a bit on the nose, but I still enjoyed it. Yeah.
I probably need to revisit John Wick. I think I watched them the first time in too quick a succession.
Yeah,
I got a little John Wicked out. But if I was to rewatch and sort of separate them with different types of films, I think I'd appreciate them a lot more, because I really enjoyed them the first time, but it became too similar as I was watching through, and because the length of the film gets bigger and bigger each time, that can be a little tedious if you're watching them back to back.
Yeah.
My next film, after we had reviewed Mary Poppins last week, we brought up Mary Poppins Returns, and I was really, really curious to see what it was like. I was a little disappointed. I think that if you were a child watching it for the first time, you would probably engage with it. And so I had a lot of respect for it in that regard, but as a fan of the original, I found it really hard to connect with the characters in this one. You said too last week that you'd seen it before, and your memory of it was that you quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, when it came out, I went and saw it at the cinemas with, and I think I made this point when we discussed you watching it, that I went and saw it with my niece, who was probably 6 or 7 at the time. So maybe I was enjoying it because of the fact that it was of the actual experience. And this is something we talk about quite often, where, you know, the audience, in the way we're interacting with a film counts, right? So whether we see it at the cinema versus at home, who we're seeing it with, are we seeing it by ourselves? Those kinds of things count towards our experience. So that can't be put aside. So for me, I have a recollection of enjoying it, but after speaking with you about it, I am going to go back to it. So that may be, I may have already revealed 2 films that will come up on the next podcast as to what else I've watched. Yeah.
The biggest criticism I had was that it hit the narrative beats of the first film. It was exactly the same. Starts off, we're introduced to a ruffian. What would you call Dick Van Dyke's character in the first one?
Some kind of larrikin.
A larrikin. We're introduced to a larrikin who he's changing all the light bulbs in the town, similar to the busking scene.
Yes.
He sings a song about it, and then he talks about how the winds are changing. And then we are introduced to the family and their troubles. And then Mary appears, and they jump into a picture. And then there's a sequence where they go off to the bank. And then there's a sequence where all of the other larrikins in the town get together and do a big dance number together. And I understand why they hit all those same plot points, because they figure if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We should do all the things that people loved about the original. But for me, the issue with that is that it just reminds you of a better film.
Yeah.
You go, I want to just watch Step in Time.
And it's I would just watch Step in Time.
It's just on loop for 2 hours, yeah.
Goes back to that point we were just making about John Wick 2, though. Like, how do you approach the sequel? Because this is a sequel. It's not like they're trying to totally revamp the storyline.
Yeah.
Are they wanting to please the audience and the member berries too much in terms of, you know, making sure that the expectations are met?
Yeah. And the only other thing was that I felt that Emily Blunt's portrayal of Mary Poppins was a little too cold.
Wasn't sharp enough for you?
Emily Blunt wasn't sharp enough for me. No, I'm saying she was a little too sharp.
Oh, right.
I feel Julie Andrews had a really nice balance of that discipline, but also really caring and loving towards them.
Yeah.
She had the warmth about her, whereas I don't feel Emily Blunt found that balance as well. And I love Emily Blunt as an actor. I think she does a tremendous job in almost everything I've seen her in. So, yeah, I just feel like she didn't quite nail that balance.
I'm interested to go back to it.
Yeah. But Dick Van Dyke cameos, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
And he dances as an old man. This time, actually, as an old man. It's very impressive.
Final film for me was Paul Thomas Anderson's Punch Drunk Love.
Oh, I love Punch Drunk Love.
2002, Punch Drunk Love. So this is, if you're a massive fan of PTA like I am, where he's done 9 films and this one is smack bang in the middle, all right? This is a transitional point for Paul in the way he makes films, and I adore this film so much. It's all the things that were good about the first kind of era of Paul Thomas Anderson, because after this he goes off and 3 years later makes There Will Be Blood, which is a very different film in terms of tone and mood for every film that came before it, like Magnolia, Boogie Nights, that kind of thing. He's perfected that era of his filmmaking style. There's not a moment in this film I dislike. I just adore this film so much. Your thoughts on it? So you say you love it as well. That's great to hear.
I really like it. I was literally doing a list of Adam Sandler films today in the office, so that came up. I really just adore Adam Sandler's performance.
Yes.
It's so good. It's really, really captivating. I think for me, I always find it very fascinating when I see a primarily comedic actor, especially someone who does films as ridiculous as the ones that Adam Sandler does, when he turns on his acting chops.
Yeah.
That is always very impressive to me, and it instantly draws me in. And I think if you're looking for some of his better films in terms of acting performances, this one should be very close to the top of the list.
Funny you bring this up. After watching this, I thought to myself, I have to go back and rewatch Uncut Gems, because I thought that he was great in that as well.
That's a tough watch, though.
Tough watch, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it on the first watch, so I'd be interested to go back to that as well. This film, to me, is a masterpiece in terms of sound and editing as well, the use of sound to build anxiety, and the way the camera movement is there as well. It's just, there's so much going on in this film, and it's a neat 95-minute film as well. So it's the shortest film that Paul Thomas Anderson has made. But yeah, go and watch Punch Drunk Love if you have not before.
On the other end of the Adam Sandler scale, I watched Murder Mystery 2.
Oh, I thought you were going to say another film there, and we're like...
No. These are not my words. There is a review that says that this film has no right to be as enjoyable as it was. And I thought that is a perfect way to sum up how I'm feeling about it, because it's obviously ridiculous. One of his fun films in between his great acting performances, where he just gets a bunch of his friends together, they go to some fun locations and just have a ball. But if you've seen Murder Mystery 1, I assume you haven't, but to our audience, if you've seen Murder Mystery 1, I think this is significantly better than Murder Mystery 1. I think there's some great moments of filmmaking in a film that's so quirky and silly. Particularly in the action sequences, I think the first film relied heavily on characters just improving and trying to say funny lines, whereas this one, there's elements of that, but there's also just some really great set pieces and action sequences and things like that. So I think more care has been taken to construct this film. I was very tired when I was watching it, so I would love to watch it again with fresh eyes. But yeah, it was a bit of fun, and it was certainly significantly better than I was expecting it to be.
And your final film?
My final film. So I'll be very quick. I want to briefly talk about another film, and I want to briefly talk about a TV series that I've been watching. The first one, I rewatched Scream 6. Now, because I've already spoken about it, I won't go into any plot details, but I did want to let you know that I've been hearing a lot of criticism about the film, and I'm a person who likes to listen to a lot of YouTube videos on what people thought and reviews. Been hearing a lot of criticism about the film, and I really wanted to bring it up because this is a perfect example of a film that has a lot of flaws in it, but none of them bothered me because I was so engaged with it.
Interesting, okay.
So lots of people are critiquing like the believability or certain things that are happening in the plot that just don't make sense. And I go, yeah, I guess you're right. It doesn't really make sense. But I was engaged and I really enjoyed it.
But I don't care.
Yeah, exactly right. So I just wanted to bring it up for that point alone. But I was very glad that I got to see it with my sister, who I've watched all the Scream films with, and she really loved it too, which was nice.
Cool.
But the only reason I want to mention a TV series I've been watching this week is because it's got a really interesting story. Have you heard of Party Down?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just started watching Party Down. I'd never heard of it before. I found it on a streaming service and was looking for something so that I wouldn't flood the podcast with more film choices. It's an Adam Scott TV series. It's got Ken Marino, Lizzie Kaplan, Ryan Hansen, Jane Lynch. It's stacked with these big actors, and yet It's so silly and quirky, and it's got a really interesting story behind it. And that's the reason I wanted to bring it up. It was originally released in 2009. The second season came out in 2010, but it was hampered by the fact that Jane Lynch had to step away from the series because she had been given a regular role on Glee at that point.
Right, yes.
This was also at the point where Adam Scott's career was starting to take off, and it wasn't a very popular show. None of these actors were overly big, or certainly not as big as they have become in the last 10 years. And so I found it really interesting when I saw that there was this third season of it that had been released in 2023. Mm-hmm. And so it was so cool to think that the show had completely dissipated, and then over 10 years later, they brought it back, and I was just so excited to see these characters who are all aspiring actors, but they work for a catering company, and they cater for parties, and I was just so excited to see, well, what are their lives going to look like 10 plus years down the track? And it's so funny how they introduced them at the start of season 3, and they all seem to have moved on from this catering business, and then within one episode, all of them through different circumstances end up having to work back there again.
I'm going to get you to pause because I haven't watched any of the new
I'm not going to say any more plot points, but how they naturally bring it all back to the company again. It's so good.
So the first time I tried to watch this show, I didn't get into the comedy tone of it. It just didn't click with me. And it ticked all the right boxes in terms of what I should normally like, but it just didn't hit. Earlier this year, so funny you bring this up, Ken Marino was on a podcast that I listened to, Office Hours with Tim Heidecker, and he is such a lovely human being in real life, and I know this is his shining star in terms of his back catalogue, so I'm like, I have to go back and watch Party Down. He was on it to kind of semi-promote the new season. So I haven't yet gone back, so that's a great holiday setup for me.
Yeah, I would love to chat that with you.
Yeah, for sure. Funny you bring that show up, because I'm just going to say one show that I've been watching. I've watched a few, but I'm going to bring up, I've been watching Fleischman is in Trouble, which is the new Jesse Eisenberg show.
Also with Lizzie Kaplan, right?
Also with Lizzie Kaplan. That's why
we've been doing good with our 6 degrees today.
Absolutely. So I've been really enjoying that. I watched the first 6 episodes of it. It's based on a book. It's not a comedy, but there's comedic elements to it. It's more drama. Claire Danes is amazing in it. I have a lot of respect for Claire Danes' acting chops. But Lizzie Kaplan's great in it as well. Jesse Eisenberg, I don't find overly appealing as an actor. But
I love him, but yeah, he rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
He's certainly serviceable in this, like he's fine, but I do like the way the story's told as well. So Fleischman is in Trouble is one that I would recommend if you're after something a bit more, I don't know how to describe it, adult contemporary. Like
this is to the audience?
That's
or to
right,
me?
You know, to all. Like, yeah.
I'll definitely watch it over the break.
Yeah.
Alrighty, guys. So, as we said earlier on in the episode, we do want to do a very, very brief ranking of the 8 films that we have watched for the term. We thought it'd be a bit of fun to put a poll up, get some student feedback on this. We're going to talk about our rankings, and we're also going to talk about ultimately what Film Club as a collective ranked the films. Now, there's a few things that we do need to clarify. They may not be the most accurate rankings from the Film Club crew for one pretty major reason. We only got them to vote for their favorite film. So, for example, if they had put one film as their favorite and then every single person thought another film was their second favorite, but nobody put that second favorite as their first favorite film, it would still rank last on the list. So it's a little bit skewed, but I think it's a pretty accurate reflection of which films were very, very popular.
Now, I think we also need to clarify another thing, which is I was unaware that we were presenting our own ranking for this as well.
Wow.
And I have nothing prepared.
That's okay.
So I'm going to rank on the spot, which is absolutely fine, but I will put the caveat out there that I may do an 8-1 right now, and then in
later on go, I should have said that.
Yeah, and then really beat myself up and lose sleep on my big pillar.
Well, I do apologise. Perhaps I hadn't been overly clear when I'd suggested the idea.
I'm excited by being put on the spot like this. So I'm all about it. So I don't know if you want to start in a particular way while I frantically rank myself.
Well, I will. This will please you. I will announce that the student film that was ranked the lowest, receiving no votes, which must mean that Ethan didn't vote on the polls. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So this is probably why I went to so much trouble to explain how we went about getting the votes, because I'm sure that Indiana Jones would be quite high on people's lists, but nobody from Film Club ranked it as their favourite of the 8 that we have watched this year. I was gobsmacked, but I won't lose any sleep over that particular one.
Right.
What about you? What would you rank in your 8th position?
Top Gun.
Oh, good. That's me
That's
too.
easy.
So,
I like before I even brought up the list just to remind myself of what the 8 are. I'm like, I know what my least favorite was. Yeah.
I suspect this may be the only thing that we agree on on the list. So Top Gun was also ranked pretty low for me. Shocker, I know. If you've listened to the Top Gun podcast, we spoke very highly of it. No, I joke. We weren't overly partial to Top Gun, but I would say besides that, in my number 8 position, I had a lot of trouble ranking the other 7 films that we looked at.
Having a look at the list now, I'm going to have a lot of trouble when we come into the pointy end of the list. Number 7 for me is not too hard though.
Oh, okay, go for it.
Indiana Jones.
Wow, this is where you and the students see eye to eye. Yeah. Speaking of number 7 for the students, they had Top Gun ranked in there. So you and them are pretty much on the same page at this point.
At least at this point, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to shift around. I can guarantee that. For me, at number 7, and it pains me to say it, but I actually had Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Mm-hmm. So very enjoyable watch for me, but I just thought there were some stronger candidates in the bunch.
It does get more challenging at this point. I would put Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse at number 6 for me. Very much an enjoyable film. But yeah, certainly not a contender in comparison to the other 5.
I mean, it was an animation. It never stood a chance.
Well, yeah, that's a valid point.
At number 6 for the student-selected films, we have Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So this is where I'm starting to line up a little bit more with them, and I think we're going to be a bit more on the same page going forward than you will with them.
Right.
So again, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it was a very enjoyable watch. I was even speaking to some of the students about it today when they were voting, and as I said, a lot of people had it ranked quite high on their list, but very few had it as their top pick.
So that was number 6?
That was number 6, yes.
What about your number 6?
Oh, my number 6. Oh, I'm going to break your heart a little bit here. Mary Poppins.
Yeah. Oof. No.
You know I love Mary Poppins. I know you love Mary Poppins, but for me, there were just too many other strong contenders. Some of my absolute favourites of all time have been watched throughout the term, so it made it very, very tricky for me to put Mary Poppins any higher in my rankings.
That's fair enough, because it's at this point where the final 5 becomes more challenging for me, and I would have Who Framed Roger Rabbit at number 5. So I adore the film, but there's just some stronger contenders up the pointy end.
Yeah, that's very fair. Number 5 for the student films, and this could be number 5 or number 4. We actually had a tie in this position. It was either Mary Poppins or The Truman Show. Right. So they both received the same amount of votes in terms of favourite films. So that was coming in at 5 and 4. For me, at number 5, I had The Truman Show. Again, I love it. I love Jim Carrey in general, and I think this is one of his strongest films, but there were just some crackers at the top of my list. For me, number 4, since we did 2 of the student films at the same time, was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Possibly my favourite iteration of Spider-Man, certainly in my top 3.
It's my favourite.
Yeah, it's your only. Certainly in my top 3 Spider-Man features, it was a tough competition.
So if we're also rounding off the number 4 positions for me, Ferris Bueller's Day Off would come in at number 4 for me. Adore the film. The rewatch this year made me realise how much I enjoy this film. I had forgotten how enjoyable this film is.
It's great.
Yeah,
it's so good. Yeah. And Matthew Broderick is just so charismatic in it. But alas, it came in at number 3 for both me and the students. So
I'm not too far off the mark there then.
No. I mean, with only 8 films, you can't really get it too mixed up.
That's true, yes.
Coming in at number 3 for you.
So we're doing the final 3. Here we go.
are doing the final 3.
Final 3. The third one for me in the list would be Back to the Future.
Okay.
Very hard choice to make. Absolute classic. You know, not flawless,
Not full. No film is. Hey, Ollie. I've forgotten the films that you've said, so this actually is very exciting for me, anticipating what you're going to put in your top 2 rankings. Number 2 for the student-selected films was also Back to the Future. For me, in my number 2 position was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So right. I guess I was the only one who liked it, hey?
So that is leaving number 2 position for me, and the reveal of that is The Truman Show. So hey. I love The Truman Show. I came in, I obviously saw the film when it came out, but studying this film for year 10s a few years ago made me aware of how rich this film is, and I would have watched it at least 10 times now, and I just find something new and exciting about it, and just it's got so much going on. So yeah, big thumbs up for Truman Show.
Yeah, and look, to me it's not surprising that it's ended up so high on your list. Indiana Jones, for me, the logic behind that, the reasoning behind that is, if it was Raiders, it might have even come in at number 1. Right. I keep a list of my favourite films on Letterboxd, and I went through, and about 4 of our films from the term have appeared in that list. So I stayed loyal to the list. I put them in the order that they appear.
Fair.
And so even though Raiders is on my top list, The Last Crusade didn't make the cut. So it falls into the number 2 position, leaving only Back to the Future as my top pick for a film.
Right. Student reveal?
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Is there number 1?
It romped into first place.
Recency bias, I'm calling it out. We watched it this week.
I don't know about that.
No, I like putting that joke aside, I actually think that the students would have this one at the top. So.
And I actually wasn't in film club for the entirety of last Friday's screening. So how engaged were they?
More than they are on other films.
Yes.
Yeah.
Less iPads in the room.
Less iPads and conversations for sure.
Yeah.
Number 1 for me was Mary Poppins. I did mention in last week's podcast that upon rewatch, I added it to my Letterboxd top films of all time.
I really like it too. As I said, there were, maybe 1 weak films this term, but they were all really, really great watches. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking about them on the podcast.
So much fun.
This is obviously not a segment that will be weekly, but I think it's a nice inclusion at the end of a term to do a bit of a wrap-up of the ones that we've seen.
And we may even look to kind of wrap up the wrap-ups at the end of the year for...
Yeah, maybe. See what the ultimate film of the year was.
Yeah.
While we are talking about new segments, I ran into Ethan today in the schoolyard. He was our Indiana Jones enthusiast. I don't know where you were in that last segment, Ethan, but he suggested we do almost like a anticipation for a film that is coming out. Now I thought, I thought that perhaps since we do a collection of films that we've watched for the week, that for our anticipation one, what we could do is we could potentially discuss a trailer that's come out in the week and how we're feeling about that and if we're excited, expectations for the film, that sort of thing.
Yep.
So it might mean that if we have a particularly slow week for trailers, we will have to just pick the best of a bad bunch. But I really like the idea of each week picking a trailer that has been released in the last 7 days and talking about something that we're really excited about coming out.
All right, so this is a segment that we might bring in for the next podcast?
Yeah, and it's a nice quick one. We just pick a film each or a new TV series that's coming out.
Yep.
And we just discuss what we're excited about and I guess what the general idea of the film is.
Sounds good. I think before we just wrap up, we need to drop a code word.
We do need to drop a code word. So late in the podcast. I didn't even...
I've got one. Because when you mentioned it before and it just pops up in the background of Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse, bagel.
That's nice. That's really good. We should have just said, it's that thing from onomatopoeia text earlier in the podcast. You'll have to go back and find it. As always, guys, we do really encourage you guys to like, subscribe, comment. All of that stuff really helps us out if you're sharing this stuff around. It's also good for us to get feedback. As I said, we're incorporating new segments. We're trying to do that as much as possible. So if you have things that you want us to include, please let us know. Check out the rest of the channel as well. I should mention that Mr. Whittle and I do have to jump into a collider and get back to our own universe now, but it has been an absolute pleasure chatting to you guys this term. Thank you so much for the continued support and stay tuned for the holiday content.
Really excited for term 2 for people to really crack open the proverbial video cases. I don't know if any of our students would ever know what a video case is. Definitely digging into the films, so very excited for that.
Cool. Thanks very much, guys. Have a good one.
See you later.